And I know what you're already telling yourself, right? I can't afford to pause, etc. All the things I mentioned before. I can't afford to pause, not right now, not with everything on my plate. Listen, man, I hear you. But I'm going to save you the airfare, right? Because you don't actually need a passport to pause. The moment when people hear the word pause, their brain goes to something big or somewhere big. It's going to be a retreat in Bali. It's going to be a sabbatical. It's going to be 2 weeks off the grid. It's going to be maybe even a trip around the world like we did, right? I'm like, of course, I understand the appeal, but that's not what I'm talking about. The pause I mean is so small that most people don't even recognize it when it's happening. That's the beauty of it. And before I say anything else, thank you. Genuinely, for showing up, for listening, for the messages that you've sent that have made me think, okay, this is worth doing. And I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't make this podcast. That's the irony of all this. Speaking on stages is where my heart is. That's the work I came here to do. Right, but something happened over these 12 episodes that I genuinely didn't actually see coming. We had some friends over a couple of weeks ago recently, and at some point in the evening, one of them, my neighbor, had said to me, he started talking about the podcast. And I could tell by the way he was kind of humming and hawing, and he was very much couching his words, trying to be diplomatic. He had this kind of quiet way about building up to something he wanted to say. I'm like, come on, man, get out with it. And then he said, listen, Charles, I love your guests, but I want more of you. More of your thinking, more of what you actually believe. I think I just topped up his wine and changed the subject, which, if you know me, is very on brand, right? When someone pays me a compliment, I immediately find the nearest exit. I don't know. I've just not been too good about accepting compliments. But here's this thing about me, and maybe you can relate to this. I'm not always good at giving myself credit from what I'm capable of. I really underplay things. I move on quickly. I don't always kind of stop and say, damn, that was actually good. So when this podcast landed in the top 100 in education, like the education category, subcategory on Apple Podcasts, I had a moment. A quiet one. Something that said, wait. I'm actually doing this moment. It's not ego, it's just permission to acknowledge that something I almost didn't start has turned into something that apparently people want more of. And and that my neighbor's words, my friend's words, have been sitting with me ever since, right? So consider this episode my attempt to give him, and really I guess you, exactly that. More Charles. So last episode of the season, and no guest today, it's just me. And really just 3 things that this year has really kind of gently taught me. Things that have come up every time I'm on stage, every time I'm running a workshop, and in those conversations that happened after I've spoken on stage. When the formal stuff wraps up, the room starts to empty, and someone pulls you aside and says what they actually think, good and bad. Those are the insights, those are the nuggets I gravitate towards, and that's what I'm going for today. The first thing is about imagination. And here's the thing, we haven't actually lost it as adults, right? We still use it every single day. We've just somehow kind of flipped it. Instead of using it to dream forward, to picture what could really go right in our lives, to imagine the potential or the possible, we use it to imagine everything that can go wrong. I do it myself, and I know others do it too. My daughter said something to me recently that stopped me in my tracks. I'll get to it in a second, but she put her finger on something that I think most adults quietly know is true to themselves, right? So that's the first thing. I want to talk a little bit about imagination. The second thing is about the pause. Like a lot of you know that, of course, the name of our podcast is When We Pause. But when I talk about the power of pausing, immediately I already know what some people are thinking when I use that phrase. I can't afford to pause. Not right now, not with everything on my plate. Like, okay, I hear you. But honestly, I'm here to save you the airfare because you don't need an actual passport to pause. I think that there's a ton more exciting and more accessible version of this concept of pausing that most people realize. So that's the second thing I want to talk about, the power of pausing. The third thing I want to talk about is failure. And trust me, I'm not here to tell you to fail fast or fail forward or fail often. I've heard that. You've heard that, right? What I want to talk about is something more personal, and it's really my own relationship with failure and what I've learned about what actually happens in the aftermath of failure. Because that's where everything either falls apart or it comes together. So those are the three things. They've been kind of rattling around in my head all year round and shaping how I think about my own life and my own work and how I show up for people in terms of what I do. And really, I can't wait to dig into them, right? Really, it kind of starts off with my conversation that I had with my youngest daughter. So I'm sitting at my desk in my basement office, typing away, and I hear the front door open, right on cue. And of course, I hear the sound of her bag dropping somewhere on the couch, between the couch and the floor. Because, why use the hook that we've given you, right? When the floor is so conveniently right there. Anyhow, these footsteps come running down the stairs. And my daughter always comes down after school to say, hi, give me a hug, tell me about her day. Both my girls do this. It's one of my favorite moments of the day, honestly. But this time she kind of skips all that. There was no hug, no kind of sheepish, hi, Dad. She just launches straight into this diatribe. She's like, Dad, someone in my class said that adults are boring. They never use their imagination. So of course I turn to her and I look at her, turn away from my screen. And my first instinct, classic me of course, is to jump straight in with a response, to defend the adults. What are you thinking? Who said that? Represent the team, but I don't know, something made me stop. I just asked her, well, honey, what do you think? She paused and she kind of looked at me for a moment, the way that kids typically do when you can actually see the wheels turning and, they're actually thinking and not just waiting for their turn to talk. And then she said to me, I think grown-ups do use their imagination. They just use it to imagine stuff going wrong. And then she just turned around and ran back upstairs. Done. Conversation over. Completely unbothered. I just burst out laughing. Of course, she didn't even notice. She'd moved on to whatever whatever thing was getting her attention, right? Something obviously more infinitely interesting than me, whatever was after our conversation. But I couldn't move on. That line just sat there for me. Grown-ups use their imagination. They just use it to imagine stuff going wrong. I was still thinking about that in the meeting I had later that afternoon. Still thinking about it over dinner. I'm still thinking about it now. It's the reason why I'm talking about it now, right? Because she's right, isn't it? Isn't she? Kids imagine possibilities. Adults imagine consequences. What if this work slowly becomes, what if it doesn't? And somewhere in that shift, quietly without even us noticing, we stop dreaming forward and start bracing for impact. I see this every other Friday. I volunteer at my daughter's school. 4 or 5 kids, 30 minutes each, and I help them with their reading. And every single time I walk out of that school, their classroom, I always learn a little bit more, right? I always learn more than I actually give. I feel kind of guilty about that, but I don't remember. We were reading a particular book, and I asked one of the kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Standard question. And honestly, without missing a beat, they'll say, I want to be a vet, a singer, and an astronaut. All 3. In one breath, there's no hesitation, no apology, no caveats. And I'm sitting here thinking, kid, I can barely commit to a Netflix show. Seriously, my wife and I, we spend more time deciding and arguing over what to watch than anything else. And like for 45 minutes of scrolling, and they have this heated conversation, and then we end up honestly probably rewatching something we've already seen 9 times out of 10 every single time. I don't know if my wife even listens to my podcast, but she'll get a laugh out of that. It's true. Now, obviously, that child is probably not going to do all three, right? Life has this way of kind of narrowing down things, and that's okay. But what gets me every single time is not the answer, or their answer. It's this complete absence of that little voice that we have in our head. The one that shows up somewhere between, I don't know, childhood and adulthood and starts whispering, but what if this doesn't work out? What if you're not good enough? What if people laugh? That voice, that's the one I want to talk about. Because here's what I've noticed when I speak on stages in rooms across the country. The thing that I hear most is that the most stuck leaders I meet are not the ones who lack experience. If anything, they're the ones who have so much diverse experience that every idea gets filtered through every old failure or disappointment. And slowly, without even realizing it, imagination stops being this creative tool and becomes like this risk assessment tool. None of what I've been doing would have been on my radar. Speaking on stages, writing a book, this podcast. It wasn't even this kind of quiet dream sitting in the back of my mind. And if I had listened to that little voice, you wouldn't be listening to me now. I wouldn't be here. So these days I'm trying to borrow a little bit of my daughter's version of imagination, the one that hasn't learned to be afraid yet. I'm most excited about today is work I honestly never imagined doing myself. I see what happens when people give themselves that permission. In the rooms I speak in, the conversations I have after I'm on stage, and it is remarkable how quickly things shift when someone simply decides to stop waiting for the right moment and starts asking a different question entirely. What have you convinced yourself is impossible that you haven't actually tried? Right? And that question brings me to the second thing, because the answer, whatever it is for you, requires something that most people think that they don't have. Time, space, room to think. And that's where this concept of the power of pausing comes in. And I know what you're already telling yourself, right? I can't afford to pause, etc. All the things I mentioned before. I can't afford to pause, not right now, not with everything on my plate. Listen, man, I hear you. But I'm going to save you the airfare, right? Because you don't actually need a passport to pause. The moment when people hear the word pause, their brain goes to something big or somewhere big. It's going to be a retreat in Bali. It's going to be a sabbatical. It's going to be 2 weeks off the grid. It's going to be maybe even a trip around the world like we did, right? I'm like, of course, I understand the appeal, but that's not what I'm talking about. The pause I mean is so small that most people don't even recognize it when it's happening. That's the beauty of it. It's asking a clarifying question when someone puts you on the spot. It's buying yourself a few extra seconds to actually think instead of just react, like we typically do by default. It's saying, here's a couple of things I think we need to consider, out loud instead of rushing towards your answer. It's literally taking a breath before you open your mouth to respond. And here's what I really want to be clear about, right? The pause is not about slowing down. It's not. It's about being able to make better decisions. Every single one of those tactics buys you just enough, or really space, to respond instead of being able to just quickly react. To choose instead of just operating on default, right? That's the distinction between responding and reacting, is where everything changes. You know what's a perfect example of this? Gmail. I just realized this a couple days ago. I mean, it's been there for a while now, this particular function of Gmail. But when you hit send, Gmail gives you 5 seconds to change your mind. Think about that. How many people that 5-second window has saved? Millions, probably billions, right? Everyone seems to have a Gmail account. Like, think of all those relationships that are now intact. All those jobs that are now kept because you didn't send off that missive to that stakeholder, your client, or whomever, right? All those awkward Christmas dinners that have been avoided. All because someone decided to build a pause into the process. Not to slow things down, but to make a better decision about what happens next. 5 seconds. And it changed everything. Like, to me, that's like mind-blowing. I was heading to the elevator after one of my talks a couple of weeks ago. My coat was over my arm. I was ready to call it a day. It had been a long day. I had stayed for the entire day of the conference. And someone from the audience caught up with me. And we were kind of standing there waiting as I pressed the button to go down. They pressed the button to continue. And they just kind of exhaled and said, I think I already knew everything you said here today. I just needed permission for someone else to say it out loud so I could finally admit it to myself. This is what that person was saying to me. The doors opened and then they were gone. And I just stood there. Of course, I missed the elevator completely. Didn't even notice. I was too busy thinking, that's it. That's the whole reason why I do what I do. And look, I didn't stumble into this concept of the power of pausing by accident. I've spent, really, since we've come back from our amazing around the world trip, the last couple of years around this idea in rooms across different industries, across different organizations, across different levels of leadership. And the thing that strikes people every single time isn't the concept. It's the realization that they can actually do this. Today, without changing their schedule, without clearing their calendar, without downloading an app, it's just, oh, I can actually build this into what I'm already doing. That moment when it clicks, that's what I show up for. That's what excites me. Right? Because when people leave those rooms, something shifts. They stop firing back emails they later regret. They stop leaving meetings wondering if they said the right thing. They start showing up to difficult conversations feeling like they've actually had a moment to think first. That's what better decisions look like in practice. Not bigger, not louder, just more deliberate, more intentional. The pause is not a break, it's a tool. The best leaders I've been around don't pause less than everyone else. They pause more. Not because they have more time, but because they figured out a few seconds of stillness before a decision saves them hours of cleaning up after a bad one. So let me ask you, when was the last time you paused before making a decision that actually mattered? Because here's the thing that no one tells you about pausing. Sometimes what you find when you pause isn't necessarily pretty. Sometimes you pause and what stares back at you is a setback, a mistake, a failure, or something that didn't go according to plan. And what you do in that moment, that's everything. And that's the third thing I want to talk about. Failure. I know. That word. And we've all kind of nodded along at the conference when you hear the word failure or someone talks about failure. And then we all go back to our desks and we do everything in our power to not fail. Right? But here's what I want to clear up straight away. Every time I speak about this, and I've spoken about it enough times to know where people's heads go when I talk about this concept of a failure, is that the assumption is always the same. They think that when I get up on stage or lead a workshop around failure, they think that I'm going to help them get other people to be more accepting of their mistakes. They think I have this magic wand that can allow them to allow other people to be more accepting of their setbacks or their failures. That is about managing perception and minimizing the fallout. And trust me, there are people who can do that, but that's not for me. That's not my area of expertise and my area of interest. And I have to stop them right there. You cannot make other people's opinion your responsibility. You cannot make other people's opinion of your failure your responsibility. That is a full-time job. As far as I know, no salary, no benefits, no end date. What I can help you with is something far more valuable. I can help you recover faster from your failures. Right? So in my work, I talk a lot about this concept of failure immunity. And before you think that means that it's never failing, it doesn't mean that. It's not about being bulletproof. It's about becoming immune to the feeling that failure leaves behind. The emotional sting that lingers. That voice that follows you to the next room, to the next meeting, to the next decision, whispering, "Oh, remember what happened last time? Are you sure you want to do that?" Right? It's not about eliminating failure. That's not what I talk about. It's about eliminating the hold that it has on you afterwards. And I know exactly what that loop looks like because I lived it. When I came back from our year traveling the world and found out my job was no longer around and no longer existed, I nursed it. I treated that failure like it had needed my constant attention. Like if I just kept going back to it, somehow it would get better. It didn't. I just got more comfortable. Right? And then I cursed it. I blamed the organization. I blamed the timing. I blamed myself. The blame felt productive. It really did, but it wasn't taking me anywhere. And then I would rehearse it over and over, not learning anything new, just reliving it. Letting it get louder, letting it start feel like a prophecy about what was coming next. I would nurse, curse, and rehearse my failures. I know, it sounds like a terrible law firm name or something like that. But trust me, you've been a client at some point, right? That loop is what actually damages you. Not what happened, but it's how long you stay in that loop of nursing, cursing, and rehearsing your failures. The people I work with don't have time for that loop. They have teams counting on them. They have decisions that can't wait. And one bad quarter, one difficult decision, one moment that didn't go to plan, I mean, that can't be allowed to define what comes next. And that's exactly what I help people do. Not making peace with your failure, just being able to move through it, right? With a framework, with language, so that when something goes wrong, and it will, you know what to do with it. Right? The big thing for me is that you need to make sure, or through the framework I've put forward, is to allow yourself the opportunity of ensuring that your last failure, it doesn't influence your next decision. Your last failure does not influence your next decision. That's what failure immunity is about. After one of my sessions when I talked about failure immunity, a woman came up to me and said, "Thank you. You've given me a language for something I didn't know how to talk about before. I feel like I can finally move through this without it following me into everything I do next." And that's the outcome. That's what this is for. So what's the failure that you're still carrying that you need to put down? So yeah, those are the three things. We've forgotten how to imagine forward. We've overcomplicated this concept of pausing. And we've been carrying failures that have never meant to travel this far with us. Right? None of this was theoretical for me. This is stuff that I've lived, stuff that you've lived, that World trip for me changed everything. The job wasn't there when I got back. The moment I decided, very messily, very nervously, with absolutely no guarantees, I'm going to step forward anyways. And what I know now, what this past year, the last 365 days have taught me more than anything else, is that the people who move forward aren't the ones who have it all figured out. Right? They're the ones who decided that waiting to have it all figured out was costing them more than just going for it. One of my favorite quotes is, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step forward." I think about that kid at my daughter's school, the one who wants to be a vet and a singer and an astronaut, and I think, what if we just borrowed that for a day? Right? Not the naivety, right? Just the absence of that little voice, just for one decision, one conversation, one moment when instead of asking how things can go wrong, you asked, what could actually go right? What would you attempt? I spent the last year in rooms with leaders who were caring more than they actually let on. You can see it in their face. Making decisions under pressure with less support than they deserve, running so fast and so long that they've forgotten what it'd actually like to think before they respond. And every single time, when we slow it down just enough, something shifts. The decisions get better, the recovery gets faster, the version of themselves they've been postponing starts to feel a little bit more possible. That's the work. That's what I show up to do. And if any of this resonated with you, if you found yourself nodding along or sitting with one of those questions a little longer than you expected, I'd love to continue this conversation. Not in a podcast, in person, in the room with your team, your leaders, your organization, because the best version of this isn't something you listen to on your commute. It's something you experience together, in person. Something that changes how a room thinks, how a team recovers, how a leader shows up when it matters the most. Come find me. My door is always open, and I promise you that the conversation after this is even better than anything you would have heard today. Right? Because the best conversations I've ever had didn't start on the stage. They started exactly like this. Folks, I'm Charles Achampong. Season 1 in the books. My neighbor asked for more Charles, and well, there you have it.